Hello everyone. Today I'm back to continue sharing the love story of Sam and Officer Lee. After a short time passed, days filled with both unfamiliarity and constant busyness, Sam's baby finally turned 1 month old. The moment arrived quietly without any fanfare, yet it was enough to make Sam sit still, gazing at her child for a long time, a feeling rising in her heart that she couldn't quite put into words. 1 month of sleepless nights, of anxious moments when the baby cried, of exhausting mornings. All of it now seemed to settle down, giving way to a very real sense of peace. Sam began thinking about holding a 1-month celebration for her child. Not a grand party, no need for extravagance or display. She simply wanted a small warm gathering with a few close friends, those who had been by her side through her hardest days. To Sam, it wasn't just a traditional ritual. It was her way of marking the very first milestone on her journey as a mother. When she told Lee about the idea, Sam hesitated a little. She worried he might think she was rushing things, or that he might be concerned because there were still so many uncertainties ahead. But contrary to her fears, Lee listened quietly, then gave a small nod. "I agree," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Our baby turning 1 month old is important. We should give our child a proper memory." It was just a simple sentence, yet it made Sam feel her heart grow much lighter. She realized that it wasn't only her who was thinking about their child. Lee too was slowly learning how to become a father, in his own quiet way. From that day on, the two of them began planning the celebration together. Sam carefully wrote down everything that needed to be done. A simple offering table, a few familiar dishes, a list of guests to invite. Lee took the initiative with the rest, arranging his time, preparing the space, and handling the small details Sam often forgot because she was so tired. On the rare evenings when they sat together, Lee would hold the baby while Sam leaned back against the chair, talking softly as she adjusted her notes. The atmosphere was peaceful. There was no more rush, no more anxiety from those early days, only a sense of calm and certainty, as if they were laying each small brick together to build their young family. For Sam, the 1-month celebration wasn't just a day for her child. It was also a reminder to herself that she had come through a journey that hadn't been easy, and that now she no longer had to walk forward alone. On the morning of the celebration, Sam woke up earlier than usual. The sky was not fully bright yet, soft sunlight slipping through the curtains and bathing the room in a gentle glow. She lay still for a few seconds, listening to her baby's steady breathing beside her, her heart filled with both excitement and worry. Not worry about anything major being missing, but the familiar concern of a mother, afraid that nothing would be perfect enough for her child. Sam quietly got out of bed and stepped outside, her slippers barely making a sound. The house was still silent, but in the kitchen Lee was already there. He didn't say much, simply arranging the chairs, wiping down the table, checking the offering setup one more time. Every movement was slow and careful, as if he were afraid of disturbing the sleep of mother and child. Sam leaned against the doorway, watching him for a long moment. She suddenly realized that since becoming a father, Lee had changed in the quietest way. No show, no words, but every action of his now revolved around the two of them, enough to make Sam feel at ease. As the sun rose higher, close friends began to arrive. Not many, not noisy, just a few familiar faces, people who had witnessed Sam through her most exhausting days. The small house gradually warmed with greetings, gentle laughter, and sincere well wishes. Some lingered by the baby's cradle. Others softly touched the baby's cheek and smiled. Every gaze carried tenderness, softening Sam's heart. She realized that her child wasn't being welcomed merely as a newborn, but as a small joy that everyone wished to cherish together. When it was time for the ceremony, Lee held the baby in his arms. It was the first time he stood before so many people like that, holding his child firmly against his chest. He said nothing, only lowered his head to look at the baby, his eyes deep and composed. In that moment, Sam could clearly see his genuine awkwardness. A man becoming a father for the first time, unaccustomed to expressing emotions, yet loving his child in the most instinctive way. As everyone offered their blessings, Sam stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on Lee's shoulder. She looked at her child, then around the room, at the close friends, at the man holding their baby, at the peaceful atmosphere she once thought she would never reach. In that moment, Sam understood something very simple. Her child was no longer growing up only in her arms. The baby was being wrapped in a quiet, steadfast, and complete circle of love, complete in its own way. And for the first time in a long while, too, Sam truly felt at peace. When the last guest left, the door closed softly, and the house gradually returned to its familiar quiet. The lively sounds from earlier seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving only the gentle breeze slipping through the window frame, stirring the thin curtains, and the baby's steady, fragile breathing in the cradle. Late afternoon light slanted across the tiled floor, stretching into long, pale streaks of sunlight that faded with each passing minute. Sam stood still for a moment in the middle of the room, as if to be sure everything had truly come to an end. Inside her was a strange feeling, both relieved and empty. The 1-month celebration had gone exactly as she had hoped. Simple, warm, nothing excessive. And yet, when it was all over, she found herself needing a little more silence to adjust to the calm that followed. Sam began to tidy up. She moved slowly, every gesture gentle, as though afraid of disturbing the atmosphere that had just settled. She gathered the bowls that still held a trace of warmth, folded the tablecloth, wiped away the small, insignificant marks on the tabletop. It wasn't because the house was messy, but because she wanted to prolong the feeling of being inside a moment that felt deeply real. Lee didn't say anything. He quietly stood beside her, helping. He stacked the chairs, carried things into the kitchen, returned everything to its place. No one needed to remind the other, no questions were asked, yet every small task fit together naturally. Sam suddenly realized that a quiet understanding had formed between them, something that didn't come from promises or obligations, but from having lived through very real days together. When the house was neat again, Sam turned toward the cradle by the window. The baby was sleeping soundly, the small face relaxed, lips slightly parted, fine lashes trembling faintly with each breath. She stood there watching for a long time, unhurried, as if looking away for even a second might make the moment disappear. A feeling rose in Sam's heart that was hard to name. A month ago she had been struggling with vague fears, afraid she wasn't good enough, afraid her child would lack something, afraid of an uncertain future. Now, watching her baby sleep so peacefully, those worries seemed to soften. They didn't vanish completely, but they no longer made her tremble as they once had. Lee appeared behind her without her noticing. He bent down to look at the baby, his gaze quieter than usual, then looked at Sam. One hand rested lightly against her back, barely touching the fabric of her clothes, as if he were afraid of startling her, afraid of breaking the fragile stillness. "Are you tired?" he asked, his voice low and soft as though speaking to the space around them. Sam shook her head. "Not tired, just feeling a little empty." She didn't turn to look at him, but she knew Lee understood. After days of preparation, after an emotionally full celebration, when everything ends, that emptiness often comes quickly. It isn't frightening, just disorienting, like finishing a long journey and not yet knowing whether to stop or take the next step. Lee pulled over a chair and sat beside her. They sat there in silence, watching the baby, neither of them speaking. In that silence there was no distance, only a very natural sense of companionship. After a long while Lee spoke again. "Today you seemed very calm." Sam smiled faintly, her eyes still on the baby. "Because I know. I don't have to worry alone anymore." The words made Lee pause. He didn't reply right away. The hand resting on Sam's tightened slightly, not forceful, not hurried, but firm enough for her to feel clearly that he was there. Not with grand promises, not with words meant to move the heart, but with a presence that felt real. Lee lowered his head, his voice slow, a little hesitant. I'm not good at saying things like this, but I'll try. For our child. And for you. Sam turned to look at him. In the fading afternoon light, Lee's face wasn't perfect, nor did it hide the fatigue from days of busyness. Yet that was exactly what made her feel more at ease than ever. She didn't need him to become someone else. Just for him to stay in his own way was enough. Sam didn't answer. She simply leaned her head lightly against Lee's shoulder, letting the moment pass slowly. Lee didn't move, just sat there, allowing her to rest against him. They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the sunlight faded completely, giving way to dusk. Inside the small house, only a gentle stillness remained. A space where two people were learning how to be parents, learning how to be together without rushing. For to Sam, that moment was no less important than the ceremony earlier that morning, because she understood that after everything, what kept them together wasn't rituals or blessings, but quiet afternoons like this, when the whole world seemed to shrink into a single house, a sleeping child, and two people quietly choosing to move forward together. Night fell very slowly. After a long day, the small house gradually sank into silence. The warm yellow light spilling from the bedroom was not bright, just enough to reveal the familiar outlines of everything inside. Sam had already fallen asleep at some point, her breathing steady and light, her face still carrying traces of fatigue after a day full of emotions. The baby lay close beside her mother, the tiny body curled up, sleeping so deeply as to be completely unaware that the outside world had just devoted a special day to them. Lee stood at the doorway, not stepping inside right away. He looked at the two of them for a long time. That moment made his heart sink in a strange way. It wasn't sadness, and it wasn't exactly happiness either. It was the feeling of standing before something larger than himself. A responsibility, a bond, but also a place to return to. Lee walked into the room and pulled a chair closer to the bed. He leaned down to look at his child more closely. The baby's face while sleeping was entirely different from when awake, so peaceful that it made one afraid to make any noise. He reached out, paused with his hand suspended in the air for a few seconds, then finally dared to touch the tiny hand that was loosely curled. A touch so light it almost had no weight at all. Yet his heart tightened. Lee had never thought he would grow accustomed to this feeling so quickly. Just a month ago, he had still been clumsy and uncertain with every cry, every small movement of his child. He had been afraid of doing something wrong, afraid of not being patient enough, afraid he wouldn't be able to become a proper father. But now, watching his child sleep peacefully in the arms of the mother, he suddenly understood something very simple. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be there.
Lies gaze slowly shifted tote Sam.
She slept turned toward the baby, one hand resting lightly on the child's back as if by instinct. Her face looked much softer now, free of caution, free of the constant lines of worry. Seeing Sam like this, Lee felt a surge of emotion, both aching and grateful. He knew how strong Sam had been during the time he couldn't be by her side. He knew there were nights when she had to hold the baby alone, worry alone, face her fears alone, without calling him because she didn't want to distract him. She had never spoken of these things, but Lee understood. And because he understood, he felt his responsibility even more clearly. Lee leaned back against the chair and let out a quiet breath. His mind wasn't filled with flowery promises or grand plans, just very ordinary thoughts. How to come home earlier. How to make sure Sam wouldn't have to stay up alone so many nights. How to make sure his child would grow up without his presence missing. He looked at his child once more, then lowered his head deeply. In that very quiet moment, Lee made a silent promise to himself, unspoken, unheard by anyone else. He would learn how to stay. Not always perfectly, not always correctly, but to stay. Lee stood up quietly and gently pulled the blanket up a little higher around the mother and child. Before leaving the room, he paused and looked at them once more, as if engraving the image deeply into his memory. Outside, the night had grown deep. Inside the small house, mother and child slept peacefully. And beyond that door, a man was quietly learning how to become the pillar of a family, not through words but through his silent choice. The days after the 1-month celebration passed very quietly. No more busy preparations, no more lively congratulations. The small house returned to its familiar rhythm, slow, steady, and simple. Mornings began with the baby stirring softly in the cradle, the gentle sound of water running in the kitchen, the faint scent of thin porridge spreading through the space. Nothing was particularly special, yet for Sam, it was a kind of peace she once thought would be hard to obtain. Sam gradually grew accustomed to the new routine. She no longer panicked every time the baby cried in the middle of the night, nor startled when the baby slept longer than usual. Every movement of her child had become familiar, from the slight furrow of the brow when hungry, to the steady breathing when fast asleep. She learned to listen to her child not with anxiety, but with patience. Lee still left early and came home late as before, but something had changed. Before leaving the house, he always paused by the cradle for a moment, looking at the baby carefully, as if those few extra seconds were enough to carry the image with him through the entire day. Sometimes he bent down very low and whispered something only he could hear, then quietly left. The rare evenings when the whole family was together became what Sam cherished most. No need for many words, just having Lee sit nearby, holding the baby so she could rest her hands for a few minutes, was enough to make her feel lighter. When the baby fussed and Sam was too tired to do anything but sit still, Lee would take the baby from her arms, awkwardly soothing the child in a clumsy yet sincere way. Sam watched him without correcting or reminding him. She understood Lee was learning too, learning how to be a father in his own rhythm. Life after the 1-month celebration wasn't loud, but it was full of small changes. Sam began getting used to eating on time, sleeping whenever she could, no longer forcing herself to endure everything as before. She gradually accepted that exhaustion was part of this journey, and that she didn't need to be strong all the time. On rare afternoons when the baby slept longer than usual, Sam would sit by the window, watching sunlight spill onto the porch, feeling a brief emptiness, but no longer fear. She realized that loneliness had changed now. It was no longer the feeling of being abandoned, but simply a necessary pause to breathe. Lee sometimes called during work hours, asking just one short question. Is the baby sleeping well? Or, have you eaten yet? Simple questions, but enough to let Sam know that even when he wasn't there, his thoughts were always directed toward this home. One evening after the baby had fallen asleep, Sam sat folding the tiny items in the cupboard, 1-month outfits, a little hat, a few gifts still wrapped. She picked up each item, her heart softening. Just like that, a month had already passed. She suddenly realized that time waits for no one, and children grow so fast that before one can even get used to it, one must learn how to let go. Lee leaned against the doorway watching her for a while, then stepped closer. He didn't ask anything, just reached out to help her fold the clothes. They worked side by side in silence for a long time. No one spoke of the future, and no one mentioned uncertainties. Yet within that silence was a clear understanding. They were moving forward together, one day at a time. Everyday life after the 1-month celebration didn't look like a radiant new beginning. It was sleepless mornings, exhausted afternoons, nights waking to the sound of a crying baby. But within those small moments, Sam gradually came to understand one thing. A family doesn't begin with grand promises. A family begins with staying little by little each day, not leaving, not turning away. And for Sam, this new chapter, though quiet, was steady enough for her to believe that no matter how many unknowns lay ahead, she and her child would no longer have to walk alone.
Xin chào mọi người, cảm ơn mọi người đã xem hết video của mình. Chúc mọi người có một ngày mới vui vẻ, hạnh phúc và một ngày làm việc tràn đầy năng lượng. Hy vọng rằng những video của mình sẽ mang đến niềm vui cho mọi người mỗi khi xem, và những câu chuyện của mình sẽ giúp mọi người thư giãn sau một ngày làm việc mệt mỏi. Hiện tại thì những video của mình đang được phát hành vào khung giờ 7 giờ tối và 7 giờ sáng tại Việt Nam. Nếu mà mọi người yêu thích thì nhớ bấm nút theo dõi và bật chuông thông báo để nhận thông báo khi mình đăng video mới nhất nha. Cảm ơn mọi người đã lắng nghe hết một phút chia sẻ của mình. Hy vọng sẽ được đồng hành cùng mọi người trong thời gian sắp tới và được mọi người ủng hộ để kênh của mình ngày càng phát triển hơn. Cảm ơn mọi người và hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở trong những video tiếp theo nha.